for some people, they will be really new to the whole idea of appreciative inquiry. And I wondered if you could, like, there's literally no one better I can think of to kind of describe it sort of at its very sort of basic kind of essence, really. Like when you're teaching your kind of scholars, like on the first day, how do you kind of describe it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And yes, anybody that's Googled appreciative inquiry or that will be Googling appreciative inquiry after this, there are lots of different definitions of various different sort of academic ilk out there. And really the definition that that we really have been saying at the center, sort of AI in its essence is basically, it's the search for what is life-giving and possible within people in the world around us. Right? It's about intentionally asking what we want to accelerate and grow with the realization that what we appreciate appreciates, right? So I really have always been grateful to David and others that that they use that word appreciative, not positive inquiry, but appreciative inquiry in that economic sense of the term, right? That what we focus on, what we ask about intentionally and bring our attention to is what appreciates or grows in value. And so really at its heart for me, AI is two verbs, right? It is two verbs with really big impact. How do we appreciate, right? What do we focus on and want to grow in value, and that inquire? So appreciate and inquire, sort of two separate verbs. I like to remind people it's a doing, it's a constant doing of appreciating and inquiring into the world around us. That's where I start.
Yeah, and I hope that's what we see it as well, really. Just to choose a different focus. So in healthcare, we often think about what's not working, but this brings us a different perspective on thinking about what we want to do more of instead of what
exactly. And so much of our, whether it's healthcare or organizational management theory or change theory, has been really a medical model, a diagnostic, we sort of call it a deficit diagnostic model, right? The focus on let's figure out what's broken, what's wrong, and diagnose and sort of fix it. And there are definitely times and places for that. I mean, this isn't about an either or. Appreciative inquiry is really an invitation, I think, for an expansion of recognizing that if we are only asking about those things that are broken or not working, we're missing a whole half of the world, right? Yeah. We're missing the other half of the world. And so we have to also ask about what is working, what are the assets, what are the opportunities, and really, again, flipping things from how do we fix things to recognizing, well, let's define what do we want the future to look like together, and then how are we going to make changes, definitely, to get there.
Well, one of the comments we sometimes get when we do AI in practice, or at least when we talk about it, is that some people feel that you're sort of deliberately not looking at deficits, but actually I've found, I'd be interested in your perspective on this, but I've found actually if you ask people about assets and strengths and possible futures that are better, they'll tell you about the deficits anyway. And in fact, they'll often tell you how they overcame them or how they could overcome them in the future. Does that ring true?
I really, and I so am grateful for you bringing that up again, because I think that, you know, one of my soapbox myths that I'm always on the path to sort of invite people to recognize is, that it is never about ignoring what is wrong or what is but it's a different way of recognizing how are we going to get to where we want to go, right? So, and the defining of what we want is actually a different exercise than just defining what we don't want. Right? Like I can ask you, you know, what do you want for dinner? You can tell me like all of the things you don't want. That doesn't tell me what your favorite meal is, right? So it's like, we have to be very intentional. And I think you're right that, and I often see this sometimes, the ways that people misuse or misapply appreciative inquiry unfortunately is as a tool of silence, and it is never meant to be a tool of silence, right? I have seen, unfortunately, or people have knocked on my door and said, my team, my organization, my fill in the blank is using appreciative inquiry, so they said we couldn't talk about all the things that weren't working. And I was like, please send them to me, we'll have a little intervention, because that is not, appreciative inquiry is meant for us to deal with our biggest challenges and our biggest problems. But it invites us to address them and to work on them in a different way, right? So it's never about that we can't talk about things or that we can't bring up challenges, but it's like, how do we bring up those challenges in the context of not just sort of wallowing in the challenges, but really then, okay, a challenge, or if somebody, I always say, if somebody has a frustrations, one of our dear colleagues, Yop Young, says that a frustration or somebody that's upset is because they have a frustrated dream, right? If somebody's unhappy or, or they're mad in a team or they're mad in a system, it's because they have a vision that they want it to be a different way. That's why they're upset. That's why they're frustrated, right? And so let's inquire into, well, what do you want it to look like, right? And then unpack exactly as you said, Adrienne, like, when have we overcome challenges? What are the ways that we have had resiliency in the past, right? And so unpacking that, but toward the end of where do we want to be going, not just creating a litany of all of the problems, if that makes sense.
Does.
Yeah, it really kind of rings true that. And already just hearing you talk about that, I get that little wave of energy, the whole sort of the way to kind of address a problem by thinking about what could be. It feels so much more energizing, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, and we know, we can get into this with the principles. I mean, we know, it's like we always are like, yeah, we know this works in practice. We know now, like, we have neuroscience behind this now, right? Like, we know at like a neurological level, exactly like you're saying, is that when we're coming from a positive affective state, Barbara Fredrickson's work in positive psychology, one of her classic articles, What Good Are Positive Emotions? They feel good, but they actually make us smarter. They broaden our cognitive capacity and our ability to make better decisions, be more creative, all of those, to be more collaborative with one another. So at a neurological level, like, we are learning, right, that our brains actually function better when we are focused and in this realm and framing things from that positive affective state. Again, not ignoring, because again, we do have to address those challenges. We can't ignore them. But yeah, me asking you that is, there's something there rather than, tell me all the reasons why you're frustrated. Well, tell me, what do you want it to look like? What is it going to look like when we're successful, and how are we going to get there?
You mentioned about the principles there, and this is something I've, when we kind of paused and did a little bit of the training, and I know we said you don't necessarily need the training, but I think it does help to understand the principles behind it. And I wondered, or we were hoping you could give us a kind of short
summary
of the principles of where it kind of comes from to help people understand.
Definitely. And I appreciate that. That is something too that we really focus on at the Cooper Writer Center, the importance of understanding. Again, some people think about appreciative inquiry, we can get into the ways it's applied, right? The 4D process is an often way that people think about it. And AI Summits is a methodology of appreciative inquiry. But to us, right, it's really the heart of understanding and showing up, again, as an appreciative inquirer is really at the heart of sort of thinking about these principles. And so I'll give you just the headline and the bumper sticker on them. And then we can, if you want to go into any of sort of, again, like, where did they come from? Or again, there's research and science behind each of them. And they have implications, obviously, yes, for us in practice. And there's a sort of 5 classic principles, and we always sort of add, there's been some emergent principles as well. So the ones that we really sort of highlight and focus on are I'll just say them and then I'll give the bumpers. The simultaneity principle, the anticipatory principle, the constructionist principle, the poetic principle, the positive principle, and the wholeness principle. And so just taking each of those, the bumper sticker, what do those words mean? Because now we're in the academic realm of like, those are interesting academic words. What do they really mean, right? The simultaneity principle is basically means that every question we ask creates change, right? That simultaneity, that questions, inquiry, and change are simultaneous moments, right? It's not that we're going to go ask a bunch of questions and then figure out what we want to change. The very moment that you ask a question is an intervention. You're starting a change because you're focusing people, right? If I'm asking you tell me about morale in this organization, well, I've just focused you on morale, right? I mean, it's a focus. So there is an intervention in every question that we ask. And so that's both exciting and overwhelming, right? There's a lot of influence and power if we really think about ourselves as inquirers, as being every question we ask creates change. So again, back to how do we become intentional inquirers? So the anticipatory principle, the bumper sticker on that is that our images of the future inspire action today, right? Anticipatory, our anticipation of what the future, what the tomorrow looks like is going to inspire action today. And of course, in healthcare, I probably don't need to go into the science behind that one with the placebo studies and the whole science that we know behind just the power of images, right? The images that we hold to actually have effect. And we get into the Pygmalion studies in education, right? The self-fulfilling prophecy, sort of the images that there's been a lot of research, especially in education, of the images that teachers hold of students being, good students or bad students, literally impacts, right, how they show up with those students. So that anticipatory principle, and then the constructionist principle, the bumper sticker on this is that the words that we use create our realities, or in short, words create worlds is what this means, right? And this is really where appreciative inquiry and other work is really grounded in social construction, this idea that we've created our organizations, our teams, our relationships, right, together. We are co-creating those all of the time, and we can change them. We forget that sometimes, right? We forget that we've created our structures and our different things, but and so much of that is reinforced through our words with one another, right? So as we become more cognizant and thinking about literally the words that we use when we're asking questions, when we're in conversation with each other, our words create realities, right? So just to give you an example of this, I love it. I had a client I was working with, and we were doing some consulting with them, and they said they don't have retreats, they have advances. They're like, we don't retreat, we advance. And so just, like think about just even things like that, that sort of it's signaling, right? Our words are signaling with each other. So words create worlds. So being really intentional down to the language that we use with one another. The poetic principle is reminding us that we can choose what we focus on, that we have choice in our focus. And so it comes from the poet. The word poem is sort of like a poem or a book, right? We have, there's endless interpretations, right? And it's where it comes from, the word, the poetic principle. And so the idea is that it's all there to be found if we want to look for it. So in any system, I can look for breakdown, failure, fill in the blank of all of the ills that we usually spend our time looking for. And I didn't use the word or, and we can also look for moments of improbable cooperation, right? The times that we didn't think people were going to cooperate and they did. We can look for transformative communication, right? They might be micro moments, but the idea is that it's all there, again, much like a poem or a book, to be found and interpreted. It's all there. And it's, again, we have choice in our focus of, are we going to, again, inquire and focus on the what we don't want? Or are we going to focus on what is it that we want to find and understand and accelerate in this system? So the positive principle is this reminder that we excel best when we amplify what's working. And just as you said, Emma, right, that you were getting those feelings, as I said, this is really now so much connected to our colleagues' work in positive psychology, like I said, and other places where there's just, there's a whole sea shift happening in the social sciences where we have so focused, you know, again, in psychology, in organizational development, on understanding all of the things that aren't working. We are understanding now, like I said, even down to the the neuroscience level. And again, as I was referring to Barbara Fredrickson's work and others, of just this recognition that, you know, that positive affective space really does, like when we do excel best. Our brains actually work better, right? We can look at, like, are we swimming in dopamine? Are we swimming in, like, what are we swimming in? And how is that impacting literally like our cognition? And then you can scale that right up all the way to a system level, right? That it's not just at the individual level, but a system level, that we excel best when we amplify what is working. And then finally, like I said, that we also really focus on the wholeness principle, which wasn't one of the first 5 sort of classic principles, but has since emerged and really become an important principle. The wholeness principle really reminds us that wholeness brings out our best, whether that's thinking about it at an individual level, like how are we embracing our wholeness, again, the yin and yang of who we are, but into whole systems, right? This really gets in, and I'm so grateful and appreciating how AI is coming to bear and relevant in our very important work in the world today around social justice issues, right? And diversity, equity, and inclusion. This principle of how do we bring voices to the table that have never been invited to the table before. So in any sort of AI process or methodology, one of this principle comes into play of, you know, anybody that has a stake or is going to be impacted by this work that we're doing, we need to include them in that, right? So it's not about, we always say people don't, David, I give David credit for this. I'm not sure if he was the first one to say, right? People don't sort of resist change, they resist being changed. And that we say, right, people commit to what they help co-create. And so this has implications in any system, right? When we're doing stuff is in education for me, right? How am I bringing my students' voice into new curriculum that I'm designing? And it's not just 3 faculty in a room coming up with a new class. How are we, you know, engaging the whole system in that? And so again, that wholeness really brings out our best. Those are the principles and sort of their little bumper sticker. Happy to do a deeper dive on any of those if you want.
Oh, it's a really brilliant summary. Very easy to follow as well. I mean, as you were saying that, I've read these principles before and thought about them, but it occurred to me that the sort of principles that underpin psychology and reality, not just appreciative inquiry. This is about how we, the effect of language, as you say, neuroscience.
I'm so appreciative that you said that, Adrian, because to me that's why appreciative inquiry, and I don't even care if people call it AI or what. To me, this is a framework for just understanding how am I an effective human being in the world, right? I mean, this is like, we can get into this specific, again, tools and methodologies of appreciative inquiry, but it's a way of looking at and understanding the world. And then how do we show up together?
Yeah, I mean, we see, so just sort of practical reflections on some of the principles. So we started doing appreciative inquiry ourselves after we started learning from excellence a few years ago. We initially did a root cause analysis to try and understand what went well. That was actually quite interesting, but it felt a bit narrow and constrained and backwards looking. So then we found appreciative inquiry on the Google search and read one of David Cooper-Ryder's papers, and we made a quick protocol and just started asking questions that felt quite intuitive actually. And then over the years we've done some training and more reading on it, and spotting these principles are kind of true. So I mean, for example, we did a project where we improved some antibiotic use in our intensive care unit, and we used appreciative inquiry on some of the with some of our colleagues. And I remember, you know, we were discussing some changes that would be good to make a better future, and coming up with the interview. And we sort of parked those suggested changes as something that we would escalate. But the next day we came in and found that they'd already started to happen, because the person who'd come up with them had undergone the change. You know, that they'd actually not just hadn't even been aware of this prior to the questioning, and then went about and became motivated to change. And this constructionist principle, to me, that sort of is closely aligned with the idea of framing. So you can, so a thing that I commonly find a little bit upsetting is when we're asked how burnt out we are. And, you know, if you ask someone, are you jaded, burnt out, or tired, or thinking about resigning, then you're more likely.
I wasn't, I am now, right now. Yeah.
And that's the kind of frame. You know, you can frame that question. You can frame that question slightly differently and say, you know, what is it about work that makes you flourish? Has there ever been a day when things have gone well? And the bad stuff will still come up, I think.
Yeah. What's supporting your resiliency right now? Let's talk about, why do you need resiliency, and what is it that's happening that's supporting your resiliency in this moment? Very, again, different questions, different focus lead us to different outcomes.